So welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us today. Now, for those of you who are first timers, this is our monthly journal club that we organize here at the Tizard Centre. I am Thanos Vostanis and I'm a lecturer here teaching at the ABAI courses that we've got, the ABAI verified courses that we've got on ABA and PBS. We've got two postgraduate courses. And our monthly journal club is just our effort to disseminate best practice in behavioral science and behavior analysis here in England, but obviously in Europe and internationally, thanks to the internet and Zoom. So thank you to all of you who've joined us today. We are offering one free CEU, and to that end, I will say 3 keywords during the session. Please note them down. And then at the end of the session, please email me with your full name as you want it on your certificate, your BCBA certification number, and the 3 keywords. And I will email you back with your certificate, which is free. For those of you who might be wondering, it's a free CEU as always. If you would like to follow us on social media, we've got our Twitter account at Tizard ABA PBS. We also have our general Tizard account. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Tizard Centre, we specialize in research around intellectual and developmental disabilities and how we can support people in a values-based and ethical manner. And that's why I'm so happy to be welcoming today our panel, because they are going to be talking about exactly that. How can we be more compassionate? How can we focus on the values and ethics behind the way we support individuals? Which I suppose, to a certain extent is in line with what we call social validity, but our field sometimes, doesn't do such a good job at doing what it's preaching. So we definitely need to do better. And that's something we are really aware here at the Tizard Centre. And we focus heavily on. Okay, so let me just say that we are welcoming today Cassie Bro, Samantha Parnham, Dr. Kerry Milico, and Jeff Newman, and I will give them obviously the opportunity to introduce themselves and take it away. Use the chat box, use the Q&A, please make this interactive, that's the whole point of this, and enjoy it. Guys, over to you, and thank you very much again.
Thank you so much, Thanos.
Did we want to do quick intros or just leave it as our names?
Y'all saw the flyer, that's who we are. I think just in addition to that, the way the four of us came together, we knew each other through other means, but formally we came together as the authors of the Listening Pledge. Hopefully you all saw that as a collection of behavior analysts who committed to listening and uplifting the voices of autistics. And so it was through that vessel that Thanos was like, it was like the next day that it was released that Thanos was like, okay, that's it, you're coming on, let's do this. Rally up your troops, and we're going to do this. And so I was like, all right, well, I'm inviting the authors then. And that's how this kind of originated today. And so with that, given the journal club, we thought that this article, there's not a lot of articles out there talking about what that pledge spoke of. And so we thought this was the best thing. Jeff, you want to launch us into our discussion here?
Yeah, I'll kind of get things going. One thing for those that may not have read the poster too carefully, that I think it's important to get just to be able to kind of understand where we're coming from and understand some backgrounds is I am not a BCBA. I am an autistic person, but I also am very knowledgeable about this field and about the disabled world, both through advocacy activism, but my own profession. I work for a whole bunch of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and helping connect them with lives that they want to live. So this is not this is not ivory tower or theoretical for me. That the stuff I'm talking about today is very much stuff that I employ in my day-to-day job, and I know it works. I think that's important to mention. But hopefully for people that are in the audience, you had a chance to browse the article that we had sent along with us about avoiding ableist language suggestions for autism researchers. And just in case, I will take a moment and drop a link to that article in chat. As soon as I figure I realize I broke out my little, there's the chat. Okay. So there we go. That is the article in question. And, you know, we wanted that for, I really love this article because it hits on a lot of core things to understand about this conversation in terms of the realities of what our starting point is, which is just about 100% of all research done in the ABA field, and almost all research done throughout disability services and supports in general excludes the community of people that are actually going to experience whatever the research says to do. We are only being included as research subjects. We're not being included as consultants on the research. We're not being included as people actually drafting the research. People aren't looking into us for what our research priorities or goals or what our quality of life looks like. And that's a lot of what this article kind of leads into breaking down is that's a problem. But this article just focuses primarily on language and how language both demonstrates and perpetuates ableism. So if we're going to talk about how language perpetuates that, and really a lot of our conversation in the next hour is going to be focused less on language and more on action. But we've got to unpack and kind of understand the language part to understand how our actions also play into that. All of our actions. We all work in ableist fields. Disability services and supports across the board are unfortunately ableist because the people that should be driving services right now are not. We're providing services to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and autistic people. They should be the ones that are in the driver's seat and leadership. And we know that's not the case. So let's just start off with a lot of people are somewhat unfamiliar with what is meant by ableism. And so let me give you a definition. Ableism is the discrimination of and social prejudice against people with disabilities, generally based on the belief that typical abilities or normal people are a thing and are superior to disabled people. That so you have a group of normal people, you have, call it normal, call it non-disabled, call it typical, call it, whatever language to say what you include as of everybody. And then at some tier below, disabled people or people perceived to be disabled is what ableism says. Where instead of starting from an even playing field for everybody, we've set up our whole societies like this. And, I just want to point out that eugenics in the 20th century plays an enormous role with why we're here today. This wasn't necessarily a natural course of events. Kind of before the eugenics movement, you saw across different cultures, huge variation on how disabled people were treated. And that kind of went away as the eugenics movement of the 20th century took over disability services. excluded us from society and normalized a lot of the stuff we're dealing with. So, you know, the article talks a lot about unpacking ableism, and what I really like is, unlike a lot of stuff I see about this, it does a good job of saying, these are the terms that we should be hesitant in using, and then giving examples and explanations of kind of think about it this way instead, use these terms instead. And but you know, as I said, this article focuses on language, and a lot of what we want to focus on today is talking about how our actions perpetuate, are based on, and continue and normalize ableism. And so that's what a lot of our conversation is going to be about. So I am going to let somebody else jump in here, and kind of talk about what ableism means to you, and what kind of stuff do you see in your profession.
Oh, can I?
Go for it, Kathy.
So I was just going to say so I started out as a teacher, a special ed teacher. And I had the gift of working with students, a specific group of students from the time that they were 4 until they were 12. And that amount of years with someone gives you some pretty big variations on the behaviors that they do and sort of the interactions that you can have with a person. And so for me, my first sort of like dip in the well of learning about how ableist I had been, and how many of my actions, just as a special education teacher and as a behavior analyst, had been rooted in ableism that I didn't even see. And then there was also parts that I knew I felt uncomfortable with, but I didn't have the language to back that up. And it came down to, I had a student who's my all-time favorite student. I used to laughingly say, if I'm ever on the news, it's because I've kidnapped a student. I just think they're that great. I did not ever do that. Don't call anyone. But he, one of the brilliant things is when he was a smaller human, at the age of 4 or 5, anytime that anyone would sing in his presence, he would bite them. So it didn't matter if you were singing happy birthday, it didn't matter if you were singing a holiday song, he was going to bite you if you were close by. And at the time, there were all these interventions put in place to deal with this, because he has to go to holidays, like he will need to sing happy birthday in his life, so we've got to intervene on this. And I remember feeling uncomfortable with it and saying, like, I don't exactly know why I'm saying this, but I know that this makes me feel uncomfortable, and I know that I don't feel like this is a good thing to intervene on, because who says he has to go to birthday parties? Like, I don't really like birthday parties, so I just don't go to them. And he'll probably have that option too. And like, wouldn't it be better if we could just teach him like opportunities and ways to say, I don't want to go to birthday parties or places where there's going to be music sung at me. Honestly, someone singing happy birthday to me makes me pretty uncomfortable. So this was more than 10 years ago now, and just aged myself. But in that experience, I knew I felt uncomfortable. I didn't have the language to support it. By the time that he was 11 or 12, we had really in-depth conversations, sometimes for long periods of a time, if I was lucky. And one of the conversations that we had, I said, do you remember when you were small and you didn't like for people to sing? Do you remember why? I just actually wanted to know if he remembered that. And he was like, oh yeah, it was because I couldn't sleep. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. What made you not be able to sleep? And he was like, oh, I get like a song, you know, when it gets stuck in your head, it stays in my head all day. And then when I try to go to sleep, I can't go to sleep, and I eventually throw up. I get so anxious about going to sleep because the song's still in my head. So if no one sings a song to me, I didn't need that. And this powerful moment happened, and then I was like, I didn't know any of these pieces of information. I didn't know why this mattered to you, but I know that it did matter to you. And even though I used some of the language that I had, looking back, I wish I would have advocated more. That same student actually introduced me to disability advocacy and to ableism and a lot of other terminology that was really powerful. And what he did for me in that moment was say, like, what you were doing was, and what you were an accomplice to doing was terrible for me, and here's why. And in that, I failed him in a couple of ways. Right, I didn't know better. I should have. I went with other people's plans and didn't speak up, even though it did make me feel really uncomfortable. And I perpetuated ableism in a lot of ways, but the biggest being that I didn't say he gets to decide what his goals are. He gets to decide what he needs, even if he's 4, even if he doesn't communicate in the way that I communicate. He gets to make those decisions, and so. For me, what was born was a passion for finding out more, and so the way that I've approached sort of dealing with my own internalized ableism, which we all have, is by checking it daily, and even in interactions when I say something, being like, nope, I didn't like that, and then backing up and saying, like, here's what I wanted to say, and really like doing the vulnerable thing, which is modeling that for other people around me too, by saying out loud, I was actually really ableist or racist or whatever it was that I said. I'm actually going to backpedal and try again, and without making it a big deal, and without making it like my party about me. Just sort of like backing up, doing it better, and moving on. And that, yeah, I think that is what kind of gets me here. So I feel like it's a bit like riding a bike. Like, once you know, you can't unknow, right? It's like once you see it everywhere, and it's sort of deepening that level as a professional and as a decent human being. That is essentially my life's work.
Cassie, you're actually a really great example of all of that, and have helped me a lot in recognizing a lot of that. And actually, I want to speak of an example of a microaggression that I engaged in that Jeff pointed out one time in a conversation. Jeff and I were blasting about someone. We were talking about someone who was engaging in macroaggressions. And in that conversation, I was like, oh my God, he's such an effing idiot. And Jeff was like, can we not? And at first I was like, what? You agree that guy is such a jerk? But I took a moment. I was like, it wasn't that Jeff didn't agree with me that this guy was just being a complete jerk. It was my use of the word idiot. And had I not, read past research, and I taken a minute to recognize, like pause and recognize that word idiot had been used in reference in the past to refer to individuals, with some, intellectual disorders and disabilities and stuff like that. And in terms, it had a negative connotation, right? And it now means something completely different. Like, I engaged in a microaggression, and Jeff called me out on it. And I was like, yep, you're right. I'm sorry. That term is now going to be excluded from my vocabulary. And I apologized, and I said it, and I think somewhat in that way. And he was like, thank you. And we moved on and continued to be friends. And, and he continues to point things out for me as I am learning and stuff like that. And we have a good friendship, so, and he continues to be my teacher, and Cassie does the same thing, for times, and being like, so here's a situation where maybe da, 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 So, I mean, it's a really great, when we accept those things, and we recognize that it's not, I think there was like a meme that was going around. There's you can learn some great stuff from memes. When it said, it was like, if we can just say this, like, thank you, I didn't know that then, but I know it now. Or like, oh, I'll look more into that. Or like different ways for us to like accept better understanding, or recognize how we can learn more, as opposed to just being so defensive in a conversation. it allows us to grow and accept and recognize that, yeah, like we are in an ableist society. And as such, as Jeff mentioned, how even though we're therapists and we can be well-meaning, but we're going to engage in ableism. Like it's just going to happen. So like accept it, address that happened, learn from it, move on, and don't do it again.
And I think to add to that, Carrie, what has been, I think, beneficial for all of us kind of here is there are people who are willing to give us their spoons, right? So Jeff kindly gives me a lot of spoons because I am, like most people, relatively new, and I say the wrong thing, or I'll say like, I have a question to ask and I have no idea how to phrase this. I'm gonna try my best and then I'll go back and like revisit. And I think we've managed to create professional relationships that allow us to have those conversations in a way that's productive, because we're all very cognizant of the need to like accept the accountability, understand someone else's perspective, take a step back. And that is really that key piece, right? Like it doesn't matter if my ego's hurt because Jeff called me on something. Nobody needs to know that. I shouldn't, like, it doesn't matter. My responsibility to the person that I hurt or the community that I hurt, even unintentionally, is to say, I'm sorry, I didn't know. Now I know, and I'm going to do better, and then actively do better.
Well, and I would say like the really important piece to that is trust. And I think this is so, let's be real. I know what goes on. I know every single credentialed BCBA, everybody working in ABA in this room has had interactions with autistic people that they didn't like the way they went, that were antagonistic, that they feel like, oh, I got attacked. Oh, these people are unreasonable. And I would challenge you, what investment have you made into demonstrating that you're a trustworthy person to our community? Have you engaged with our community? Have you been vulnerable to our community? Have you owned stuff that's happened? Or have you said stuff like, oh yeah, every field has a bad past. I don't do that. I do good ABA. Have all of your interactions with our community been why you are not responsible for a lot of the stuff that's happened, that's happened by your field, that you're, a lot of the core research that is abuse written down on paper, electric shopping and slapping kids for flapping their hands. That's, I'm not saying you all do that. I know most of you, the vast majority, if anybody on this call, has never done that. But we've also never had an opportunity to access any type of healing from that, because in most cases, in most conversations with you, it's never even been acknowledged. Our pain, our experience, and our invalidation of knowing those things happened, knowing in some corners they continue to happen and get defended by people in the ABA hierarchy. And we don't have anything that we can build trust off. And so I want everybody to really think about what your role has been in any interactions you've had that has gone bad. And if your role has been just looking for the right words to say you're not responsible, and why you shouldn't personally reflect, I would urge you to channel the energy you put into finding the right words and finding the right ways to say that, you shouldn't be responsible for some of the bad actors in the ABA field. Take the energy you want to invest into arguing with autistic advocates that are very angry at what has been done, and channel that into actually addressing the bad actors that are ruining your reputation. Aim your fire that way. Have the arguments and the conversations with that group of people that are destroying your reputation. Build some trust that way. And if you take action, I promise you, you won't turn everybody around overnight, but you will start to unpack and actually develop relationships because trust is needed.
Do we have, I see in the chat box?
I saw the double empathy thing that
Yeah, I
somebody
was like,
said.
Jeff, they want to know about double empathy.
Sorry to jump in there,
Um,
guys, and interrupt. Just to say that our first keyword is trust. Our first keyword is trust.
cool.
These are deep
I like
keywords, and I really like that.
So yes, I definitely want to talk about the double empathy problem. I think that is amazing that I'm just simply not used to people having some awareness of that, bringing it into conversations like this. So very cool.
I'm pretty sure we
impressed.
didn't pay Gloria to ask this question. So good job,
So
Gloria.
I want to talk about the double empathy problem, kind of leading into a conversation about neurodiversity, if that's all right with everybody, because I think like a lot of anti-ableism efforts in the autistic advocacy world are centered around the neurodiversity movement. And a lot of people think they understand what the neurodiversity movement is, that are really only getting what our critics strawman the neurodiversity movement to be so they can more easily dismiss it. So the typical the typical straw man definition of what the neurodiversity movement is a bunch of quote unquote high functioning autistic people that are quirky and don't want to be considered disabled. So I'm sure if I asked for a show of hands of our virtual audience of how many people have heard that definition, pretty much everybody's hand would go up. That's actually not what we've ever held. And in fact, most of our advocacy is not towards or even focused on like whether or not being autistic is a disability at all, because that's kind of secondary to the point. If there's one thing that the central tenet of the neurodiversity movement is, it's that stuff like accommodations, rights, autonomy, and dignity are for everybody. And that's why the majority of the neurodiversity movement's effort is towards people that need high support, because they're the people that are most likely to have that stuff denied in their life. So to understand the neurodiversity movement, you first have to understand the social model of disability versus the medical model. So the medical model is kind of really hard to split away from ableism because the medical model is defining everything against a baseline of normal. So any disorder, any disease, anything else, like any of that, you have normal people and then you have disordered people. And disordered people, you are defined by your deficiencies, by your weaknesses, by your deviations from normal. And if that model was applied to everybody in this room, if somebody determined normal and everything that was different about you was held against you, none of you would be having a good time. None of you. But it gets applied to disabled people. And we hear this every day of our lives of just perpetuation about how we're bad. So their neurodiversity movement, or I was talking about social model of disability. So social model of disability says that disability is not inherent. Medical model says, at a certain degree of impairment, you become disabled. It's a fixed thing, it's centered on you. Social model says disability happens because an inability or unwillingness of society to provide accommodation for difference. So a great example of what's meant by that is, you can all see I'm wearing eyeglasses. I'm short-sighted. Does being nearsighted, is that a disability? Well, if these didn't exist, glasses, I couldn't drive, I couldn't read a whole bunch of stuff. Not being able to drive means I couldn't do my job. So I wouldn't have a job. I wouldn't be able to read a whole lot of stuff, wouldn't be able to drive. That would really profoundly affect my life in a lot of ways. And yeah, I'd probably be disabled, but an effective accommodation exists, glasses. So because of that accommodation, the fact that I'm nearsighted is a near non-issue. And so when effective accommodation exists, then impairments or differences stop being disabilities. And if we think about that, then the conversation shifts from how do we fix disabled people to how do we do a better job of organizing our societies to be inclusive of everybody, not just the majority. And of course, when we start thinking about things in that way, it becomes really easy to fold in and start talking intersectionality. And not just on a disability front, how are we also structuring society to exclude a whole bunch of people that don't fit into people's vision of the majority? And especially talking intersectionality, if you have multiple axes of marginalization, multiple differences, you are much more likely to face really bad outcome discrimination, harassment, and not get the even playing field because of it on multiple axes. So that's really important. Social model of disability, again, disability is, the presence of disability is caused by an unwillingness or inability for society to accommodate difference or impairment. Really important. So the neurodiversity movement builds on that. And the neurodiversity, the core concept is there's not just one type of normal brain that human beings have. There's a whole bunch of different brains. There's a whole bunch of different ways that human brains work. And with each of those different types of brains, there can be ways they work worse and ways they can work better. But regardless of how your brain works, that we should accommodate and accept and welcome all kinds of different brains, not just the ones that fit in with our view of like the majority, the normal. And no matter how somebody's brain works, they are all deserving of respect. What does this look like? This is the neurodiversity movement, originated out of the autistic community, but it is not just an autism thing. It is for any brain difference, intellectual disabilities, mental health conditions, ADHD. This is every single human being on earth brings something to the table, and our world is better when we give people a space at that table. And our current model shuts way too many people out and does not give them the same dignity, humanity, and respect that we would all want in our own lives. So, as a result of that stuff, the neurodiversity movement is calling for is for people to be experts in their own lives. Every single one of your clients knows more about them than you do. And the key to providing better services is to have your client, set your client up to be able to get that information from them. What do they want? What are their goals? What are their values? How can I respect what they want to see in their lives in ways that work for them, as where everything I do is done with their values leading and done working on issues the way they want them to be worked on, addressing what is important to them. So people are experts in their own lives. People get support rather than to fix them, rather than to cure them, rather than indistinguishable from one's peers, rather than all of that. People get support to help them accomplish what they want in their lives safely versus dictating who, what, when, where, and how their lives look like.
Oh, can I use this part to bash yoga? Can this be the bashing yoga part? Because one of my favorite examples.
I had that a little bit later, but sure.
Great. I would like to segue to bashing yoga. I hate yoga. I want to like it. I want to be that person who like goes in there and can do the thing with their body, and I just can't, right? But like being an thanks Sam. Being an autonomous person means that I can choose not to go to yoga class ever if I want to. I could avoid it for the rest of my life. At no point is even, no one's going to force me into the car, take me to yoga class, walk me to the door, maybe pulling me, because honestly, I'd probably try to run away, push me into the yoga class. And then like when I'm there, no yoga instructor is going to force my body into yoga positions or tell me this is what's good for you. Like your body would be better if it could bend this way. That just, it won't happen, right? Because like I'm an adult and I get to make my own decisions. But even as a child, right? Because I was assumed to be a normal child, even though I was super neurodiverse, which is very entertaining. But for me, because I didn't have that label, right? I was labeled as ADHD, but not as anything else. So I was considered cognitively able to make my own decisions, which I would somewhat argue against maybe, because when left to my own devices, I will never go to yoga class. But there is the gift of I'm assumed to be able to make that decision. The thing that we do with clients and with students and with people that we interact with, where we can really make the most mistakes, is when we're not assuming exactly what Jess said, that they are experts in their own lives and that we are tools in which can help make their lives better, but we are not the decider of what makes their lives better. That's a really powerful, and I give in the trainings that I've done before for Central Reach, I give like an elongated version of this yoga, which talks about some of the things like hand over hand prompting that we do, and how like that would be a yoga instructor bending your body for you. How would that feel for you? It'd probably feel terrible for me. You know, the idea of not allowing someone to make choices as to what they do to work out, right? Like maybe I like biking. I will ride a bike all day. If you try to get me to get off the bike and do yoga, I'm not going to want to do that. So like building in choice. So like all of those examples we could unpack, but Jeff hit it on the head, which is ultimately what we want, is to give autonomy to the people that we are working with. And here's the key word: working for. We are working for them, which means
You're the hired help.
That's right. We're
Mhm.
the hired help. And in that, we need to act as such and not be like, we know it's better for you because we are neurotypical. And that makes us
We're
the
the
deciders.
experts.
Yes,
Mhm.
that's the
I
ableist part.
think, and Cassie, I think that brings up a good point, because I know like a lot of the questions I get are, but the parents want A, and I'm like, I'm a parent. I understand.
I'm a
But my
parent.
job, right, my job is for this baby human. So if this baby human enjoys hand flapping and bubbles, we're going to have hand flapping and bubbles, right? And I'm going to spend time working with the parents to be like, why does this bother you? How do we get to a place where like we can enjoy this with them? Or, you know, just sort of in that space of, I'm not going to give you suggestions or try to mold what this baby human likes or wants or needs or any of the things, because that is what a certain human, whether it be a home worker or respite or parents, grandparents, that is not my job. And there is no amount of compromise that should be, I'm going to stop you from stimming because your parents are uncomfortable. And I get that a lot. And I'm like, I hear the parents saying that they're uncomfortable, and I get it. Everybody, you know, in public, it's difficult with children in general. But I don't get to say, well, I'm going to give this one to the parents and I'm going to decrease this baby human stimming so that I can build rapport over here. That's not how that works. So I think really putting yourself in that place that is knowing the small human or the bigger human, if you work with adults or whatever kind of population you work with, knowing them for who they are and what they like, so that you can, with them, for them, help them do whatever it is they want to do, right?
Totally.
And that takes us to Ascent. So just to
Yeah.
transition us, because we have like 15 minutes left, you
I
know.
really do want to get into double empathy though.
Okay.
Can I talk about stimming and you know, give me like, put me on the clock for like 6 minutes? How's that?
Okay. Okay, I'm timing you though.
So,
Before,
it's really
before you
important.
start, sorry, just to say that our second keyword is diversity. Our second keyword is diversity. Thank you.
Cool.
These are good keywords.
That doesn't count. Reclaiming my time. So the when we talk about stimming, I think everybody on this call needs to hear the perspective of take a moment to think about what you would feel about your own humanity and how you would feel about yourself if everything you did throughout your life was judged negatively. Everything that came normal to you, like even doing this, even if you're doing this inside your own house, that was held against you, and that every time you did that, you knew people around you would be passing judgment. It is devastating to self-esteem, and it is one key reason, and research support this, that we have a suicide crisis, and part of that is masking pressure. The life expectancy for autistic people is in the, I think, mid 30 years for two primary reasons. One is seizures is a major cause of mortality, and the other one is suicide in roughly equal proportions. That is why our life expectancy is less than half of what people, autistic people, neurotypical people, whatever word you want to use, that's why. And it is because we face this pressure and lack of acceptance, and the double empathy problem is a key reason why. What is the double empathy problem? So again, going back to medical model and difference, medical model says autistic people have communication impairments. More research on the double empathy problem actually shows that most of the issue is autistic people do really well talking and getting understood by other autistic people. Neurotypical people do very well at talking and getting understood by other neurotypical people. And the worst breakdowns in communication happens with autistic to neurotypical communication. We don't talk to each other well. We get misunderstood. And so what research has borne out is some ways that manifests is an autistic person gets judged more harshly and negatively within seconds of any conversation with a neurotypical person. Just right off the bat, often before we've even said a word, we're already having our neurodivergence held against us, and that's being blamed as being our fault, where it is a two-way failure in communication going on, but because we are not the dominant neurotype, it is that communication gets blamed on us. And we get held accountable, and it becomes our responsibility to change. And a lot of ABA is forcing us to adapt to the fact that neurotypical people judge us harshly and kind of don't always treat us great. And that isn't our fault. There's nothing we can do about that other than feel bad and feel like we're worthless and broken people and kill ourselves. We have to take this really seriously, and we need allies. And so that is how I would give people a breakdown of double empathy. How'd I do on my 6 minutes? I think
definitely less than 6 minutes.
4, Jeff, bravo. I would like to add, I'm going to take your 2 minutes and just add to that like one thing to consider, and this is something that I learned when entering this space, is that, I approached it as an academic exercise. And I also was just like, oh, if you only knew more about ABA, you're using this term wrong. And it took me a moment, as Jeff was speaking about it earlier on in our conversation, is that like, you had to drop that veil, you had to earn trust. And I had to not look at this as an academic exercise, as like I'm debating with my fellow BCBA, because that's not the role that this person is engaging in. That's not their position. I'm actually, engaging in some perspective taking. This is a person whose humanity I'm actually debating, right? And this is like their everyday. This is how they're sensing the world. This is how they're interacting with the environment. And here I am being like, well, this journal article and blah, 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 blah. Like, how insensitive is that, right? As opposed to just being like, oh my gosh, this person is telling me what it feels like to engage in a meltdown, like what a meltdown feels like to them, or how it feels like when their like their mom and grandma, they live with their mom and grandma, and when they ask them to, who are neurotypical, you know, and they have autism, and then like they're autistic, and when their mom and grandma ask them to do one thing, and then they shift the rules on them, and it throws the autistic individual off. Like they're like, what? And then how that leads to their behaviors and how that makes them feel on the inside. And they're sharing all this personal information, or how fluorescent lights feel to them. And like, they're educating me. And so instead of me being like, well, you need to talk to me nicely, or instead of being like, you know, you use the word operant incorrectly, or actually reinforcement is about probability and not a reward, and like being really on my ivory tower, I just sit and listen and take those golden nuggets that I don't deserve, and like file them away, because really it informs so much about their world and how they're interacting, because my brain doesn't work that way. So I think it's one thing for us to really just like take a moment and engage in perspective taking, and know that like this is not an academic exercise. It'd be like me debating my womanhood with some like oppressive male who's like, but do you really need a credit card? Because I just want to control your bank account, you know?
I thought we weren't going to talk about that, Carrie.
Sorry. Okay, so let's shift over to assent, because this is one more topic that I think is really important about what Jeff was going about. This is beyond language, this is about action and showing our anti-ableism through action.
So Carrie, I think sorry, I was just going to say, just to point out, we are going to start to host like discussion forums where we are sort of problem solving these issues. We had one not too long ago talking about a specific issue, and it was very much like, hey, here's what I was taught. How does that, and then informing it so that we can actually have concrete specific things for clinicians. Again, so it's not just performative, and it's like, oh, hi, I hear you're problematic. Try this, let us train you on this. So I'm actually staring at an informed voluntary consent and assent checklist and sample questions that goes into kind of this whole process. So there is like actual things coming if you want more information on it.
Awesome. Thank you. So, so leading into some of these action items, Cassie, you have written a few courses on assent. Do you want to start us
just
off?
written a few hours about this.
Just a few.
I feel like yeah, so Carrie and I both work for Central Reach, and one of the things that I do for Central Reach is create content amongst a lot of other things. But one of the topics that they have allowed me to create a lot of content on is on assent, and I think things that you can apply today, like easy, like showing up things that you could do without any additional instruction, would be no interventions on eye contact, right? It's unkind. The autistic community is telling you it feels extremely uncomfortable, if not downright invasive. Please stop asking us to do that. So like we could do that today as a field. We could end that now. That's an easy one. When it comes to
everybody on this call, I can tell you're listening, even though you're like, right, I doubt you have all stared at your camera the entire time.
You sure? It's not a requirement. I'm like, especially in a post-COVID world, who's going to debate me on eye contact anymore? No one. I think that one of the other things we can do is no more interventions on any kind of stimming. If any adult on this call can tell me that they don't stim, I will call you a liar, and then I'll figure out what your stim is and call you out on it. Mine is biting my nails. I also like to fidget with the back of my very short hair, including petting it. Like those are things that I do that make my body re-regulate when it feels not regulated. And every person has the ability to do that. So we could stop that today. And then when it comes to just some really basics are asking before we touch someone's body, or just don't touch their body. And if they make a move or a behavior or a sound or any type of communication that suggests they don't like what you're doing, stop it. And get to know what those non-assent behaviors are for that individual, because it may be different for every individual. And for especially, and I go into this longer in some of my other trainings, but like one of the biggest ones is for clients who have been compliance trained for a long time, it may not look like getting up and moving away from the table. It may look like freezing. And that is a non-compliant behavior. And when that happens, we're saying it's a non-assent behavior. When that happens, it is our job to then stop, back up, and figure what we need to do. That's our job. So those are some basics that anyone walking off this call can do that today. And you can do it. The argument that we most often get is, but what about kids who don't communicate in our way? That is a non sequitur. You can make that happen today by paying attention to someone's non-assent behaviors. And Carrie has built some really amazing stuff about identifying and categorizing those non-assent behaviors for individual people, so that sort of on a further basis, we can take data on that behavior and really make our practices better for that individual person. So those are all assent things that you could do today. And then if you want to know more, some are paywalled, some are not, but you can find those. And there are also lots of other CEUs about assent as well. Some of my favorite ones involve some of the other people on this call, and that I'm pretty sure is still free on Central Reach. So you're welcome to check those out as well.
To add into that, Kathy, what I think is important, especially, and I think it's undervalued, and I, could just be because this is what I do, but I'm a trauma specialist. If you are in any sort of position where you are touching people, forcing people to do things, modifying behaviors, engaging in any sort of environment in which there's the potential for trauma causing, which is every single environment, you have a responsibility to at least be trauma aware in your practices, in your interactions, all of those things. Because Kathy mentioned that freezing, that's a trauma response. If you have been taught that you can't get away, your brain is not capable of doing anything in that moment because your parasympathetic system has kicked in, and it is the person who is near you's job to help you regulate, whether it be baby human, big human. And as a trauma survivor, like, these are things that we need to consider all through our career and know about. And I'm kind of annoying with it because every time a clinician is like, what about this? I'm like, what about trauma? Let's walk through this. What does that look like? Are you touching this person? Do they like to be touched? Do they know you're touching them? What does it look like? How are you going to tell after the fact if what you did potentially caused trauma? And then how are you going to move forward? So I think that's sort of that like key piece in there is like, yes, behavior is a thing, but brain chemistry is also a thing that needs to be considered and put into programming. Sorry, step off soapbox.
I appreciate it. Another thing I would throw in here is things that people can do right now today without changing other stuff. It is impossible to get assent or consent for any behavior plan when the person doesn't know what is in your plan. You have a responsibility to not just read the plan once. If you do that, and frankly, I know that a lot of people on this call don't read behavior plans, like they don't review behavior plans with the actual person that's going to experience it. But throughout working with anybody, they should know how your plan works. You should be telling them how your plan works. You should be telling them exactly what to expect. Both so they can be prepared and understand what in the world is happening in their life, and also so you can validate assent, so they have that opportunity. Like, no hidden curriculum. One of the most jarring things that happens in anybody's world is where, and especially with autistic people, we recognize the patterns. We know what, like when the pattern changes because all of a sudden somebody put into a new plan and didn't tell us what the hell is going on, that throws our entire world in disarray in really profound ways. And that is totally unfair. It is unfair to not respecting us to do that. And I can tell you, if you're in the habit of explaining exactly how your plan works, your plan is going to get a lot better because you're going to find the places you would be uncomfortable with explaining to the person you're going to subject to that. And you're going to find all the places where it sounds weird or sounds uncomfortable to actually be explaining to the person, when you do this, I'm going to do this.
Well, and if you go back to what you mentioned earlier about the neurodiversity movement, where it's when you include them in the goal making, right? When you base your goals based on what they want their goals to be, right? So it's their goals that set the goals for the plan, right? And then when you then include them, right, when you then say, okay, the plan's made, now I'm going to tell you the plan, and there's no surprises because it's all the goals of the client, right? Then they're included in step 1, establishing the goals, 2, reviewing the goals, and then 3, then there's less probability of a scent withdrawal because they're the ones who set the goals, right? There's maybe a scent withdrawal and maybe on how you approach the goals, be like, nah, man, I'm not feeling it this way, or maybe not right now. I want to do this one first. But you've already lowered the probability of a scent withdrawal. And you may just have to go back to the drawing board with how you approach those goals. But them removing a scent with the program itself in its entirety is probably low because you built the goal around the learner.
Yeah, that was actually one of
There
my
shouldn't
favorite
be
things
nearly
with
as much
this.
resistance to changing it when
Exactly.
it happens, because you're starting
Right.
from a default position of, I am working with this person where they're at,
Client-centered.
how they want.
Exactly.
That was one of my favorite parts of this article, actually, is the fact that it said use language that you'd feel comfortable doing in front of an autistic person. And I was like, isn't that powerful? Like, if we went into all of these conversations with the preparation that we're going to be reading with, planning with an autistic person, we would all be using better language too. So.
And just to take on point also, televisibility, right? If you're not comfortable with what you're doing being aired on NBC, don't do it. So I think we are at our 1 hour mark here.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you so much.
I think this was really powerful, and it goes to show how how many things we need to improve in terms of the way we offer services. I think we all need to reflect on our own behavior. I certainly try to, and I can certainly see Jeff's points. For example, I've got autistic students who are very critical of ABA, and sometimes they will be very critical of the things I say in the lectures, and I have not managed to deal with it the way I should yet. I'm working on it, but I know that I try, to engage in professional humility. I try to understand where they're coming from, but it doesn't always come through the way it should. And I know that that's my responsibility as a behavior analyst to do better. And I think if we don't realize that that's the first step, because I used to say, oh, I'm not advocating for this. And I used to think that that's okay. And, that's as long as you don't advocate for bad practice, or then you're covered, No, it's not enough. And if we don't realize that, we need to accept the responsibility that we all hold being part of this field. If we don't take that first step, then, we're not well on our way, let's say. So we've got a lot of work to do. And thank you for flagging up some of the main things to consider. It's definitely not an exhaustive list. And I think it might be worth at some point coming back, if you would like to, and discussing some of either other things or some of the things you mentioned in even greater detail. The last keyword for today is respect. Now, I would like to say that at the Tizard Centre, our phrase is welcome diversity, and I would like us, to remember that, and we all need to work towards that, because as Glyn Murphy, one of our professors here, once said, that's what we learned from World War II, to say welcome diversity. And when she said that to me one day, I thought it was really powerful, and it always echoes in my head every time I'm having these discussions. Thank you all very, very much. We're going to upload this on our YouTube channel. So if you go on YouTube at the Tizard Centre, we're going to upload this. And may I just also say, for those of you who are not aware, we've got a journal. It's called the Tizard Learning Disability Review. And we would welcome submissions around the area of learning disabilities. So if any of you would like to, if you have something to say and you would like the community of people working in disability services, and it doesn't only include behavior analysts, it's a lot broader. If you have something to say and you want professionals to read about it, please do consider submitting your papers to the Tizard Learning Disability Review. Cassie, Samantha, Kerry, and Jeff, thank you very, very much. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and hopefully we'll have you back soon to chat more about neurodiversity and how we can improve.
Great. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you again.